Hello everybody, this is Paul from Aquariums and Gardens. Hope you're doing great today. In this video I'm going to talk to you about the aquarium nitrogen cycle. Basically what is the aquarium nitrogen cycle, why is it important to your fish tank, and how it works. So basically where your fish come from, where the lakes, the rivers, streams that they come from, ever since those have been established, they've got a biological life cycle going on there. So, and basically, things die in the lake. The fish eat their food. They poop out their waste, and then that waste or any dead plant material or dead animals that fall into that lake eventually get converted to ammonia. So that ammonia is toxic to aquatic life. So your fish, any of your invertebrates, too much ammonia in either your aquarium or in your, where their natural habitats are, it will result in a lot of those animals in that body of water getting killed. So we don't want that in your tanks, and in nature, in the wild, it's kind of a self-regulating system. There's enough going on in there that, minor spikes in ammonia in one part of the lake is not going to affect the entire lake, assuming no human intervention. So we need to get that cycle going on in our aquariums here. You might hear when you go to a pet store, you want to buy fish, they're going to ask you, hey, is your tank cycled, or do you know how to cycle a tank? And the process of cycling a tank is basically you're getting that tank ready, so that way when your fish are in there, any uneaten food, any fish waste, any plant matter that sloughs off and dies from the main body of the plant, as it decays, it's going to create ammonia, and that ammonia is not, building up in your tank and, causing health issues to your fish. Some fish, even a slight amount of ammonia can kill them. Other fish can tolerate it, but, as it goes up in too much of a quantity, then they suffer from gill burns. Their actual gills will burn due to that ammonia, and that eventually will cause them to die. So the nitrogen cycle works by basically converting that ammonia into nitrite. You have a bacteria in there that will convert the ammonia from ammonia to nitrite, and then you have another bacteria in there that converts that nitrite to nitrate. There's 3 steps to it, basically getting the ammonia, going to nitrite, and then going to nitrate. You'll probably see on your aquarium tests, nitrite levels, nitrate levels, even testing the levels for ammonia. Small amounts of ammonia, small amounts of nitrite are very toxic to fish. On nitrates, though, it's not as toxic as long as the quantities are smaller. The lower the quantities, the better. So if you have plants in your tank, even the algae that you get in your tank, those actually absorb nitrates. If you go look at like your common fertilizers for your garden or for your lawn, one of the primary ingredients is nitrogen, and so that's what you get that nitrates in your aquarium water. That's what it is. It's just in a different form. Your nitrogen in your plant fertilizer versus your nitrates in your tank, just in a different form, but that's in your tank. And so the better things for your tank, having plants in the tanks, even letting algae grow in certain spots. I mean, I know everybody wants their front glass clean, so that's great. You can see your fish, but having algae growing on your rocks and whatnot, it's nothing wrong with that, because the algae will actually eat the nitrates. But otherwise, having living plants in there also helps, absorbs nitrates. Another way we reduce the quantity of nitrates in our aquariums is through water changes, regular water changes. So those, you'll see comments on the internet, those who have heavily planted tanks, they get away without having to do too many water changes. Or those with no plants or lightly planted tanks do more frequent water changes. Depending on the type of fish you have, the quantity of fish you have in the tank compared to the size, and then how much you're feeding them, that's going to kind of govern, how often do you need to change that water and what percentage. Some people do larger quantities of water change, they're fine, but if you've got more sensitive fish, then smaller percentage, 10, 20%, 30% versus your 50% or more water change can make a difference on your fish health. So one of the common questions you'll hear, like if you go post on some of these news groups, on some of these social media websites or on these web forums, like, hey, my fish is sick, can you give me advice? The first question you're probably going to get asked by many people is, what are your parameters? What are your water numbers like? Do you have any, how much nitrate do you have built up in there? Do you have any ammonia or nitrite that could be causing fish issues? Because that's usually a common problem. With the tanks, these are closed system. So it relies on us completely to, change out the water, make sure everything's cycled in there. And so that way your fish stay healthy. So with that, that's why you're gonna get a common question, hey, is your tank cycled or not? And while you may have initially cycled the tank, that doesn't mean something can't go wrong to cause that cycle to crash. The tanks also, the nitrogen cycle kind of reaches an equilibrium level. So based on the amount of food you're feeding, how many fish you have in there, the colonies of bacteria that are consuming that ammonia, and nitrites and converting into nitrates, they become level at a certain point. Okay, you're feeding this much, you've got this many fish in there. So you add more fish to the tank, and then you can suddenly throw your cycle out of whack. Basically, you've increased the bioload in there, but the bacteria haven't caught up yet to that new bioload. So then, you need to do it, it needs to cycle. And during that time, the ammonia can build up, the nitrates can build up, and that can cause issues for your fish. Especially the new fish in there, they're more likely to suffer due to the newness of the tank, transplant shock, stress due to changing environments. So they're more likely to suffer from any spikes in ammonia. Another way to crash your cycle is by putting in untreated water in there. So a lot of people who are, keeping fish, they live in, where the water is coming from a tap. They got chlorines in there, chloramines in there. So chlorine is put into our water to make sure that, no unnecessary bacteria grow in the water. That's gonna, when we ingest it, we're gonna get sick as a result of it. So they add chlorine or chloramines, but at the same time too, we don't want to add that chloramine to the tank, because not only is it, harmful to the fish, chlorine can actually burn the fish. It also can, being antibacterial, it will kill the bacteria off in your tank, and that can actually cause your system to crash as well. So how do we get the tank to cycle? There's a couple of different ways. There's the common one. It's called the fish in way, where you actually introduce fish in there and let it cycle slowly, through their waste and whatnot. And the problem with that, though, is that, the chances are your fish, especially sensitive fish, they are going to die when that happens, because the ammonia gets too high, the bacteria is not in there in sufficient enough quantities to convert everything, so they're going to die in there. So there are some hardy fish out there that, some of the fish stores recommend use these hardy fish, kind of to get the tank cycled. But a lot of times that's not necessarily the fish that we want in the tank. So there's other ways to cycle it. And my preference is to do it with what's called a fishless cycle. And with a fishless cycles, you're not putting any fish in there. You're either cycling it with putting in there, your fish food. Just putting in fish food, nobody's eating that food, but as that food kind of rots and decays in there, it's going to get converted to ammonia, and slowly that the bacteria is basically everywhere. It's in that tank in small quantities, but as that ammonia builds up, then the bacteria population is going to expand, start converting that ammonia to nitrite and then to nitrate. And so in that, the fishless tank cycle, it can take anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks to cycle fully. And so during that time, you need to be regularly testing. I would say testing, especially on a fishless cycle, test. You don't have to test every day. Every couple of days, test it. Depending on the type of tests you have. Test strips are a little quicker and easier, but the reagent ones, where you're actually using the taking water, putting it in the test tube, putting your drops of your test material in there, that's also takes a little longer, but they're pretty accurate. Both methods are pretty accurate. So on the fishless cycle, the reason you don't have to test as much, because there's no fish in there. You're not worried that ammonia is going to build up too much and it's going to kill your fish. So with a fish in cycle, I would say, hey, monitor it more frequently. That way, if the ammonia is getting too much for your fish, you're worried about them getting injured, sick, or getting killed by that, you could always do a water change to reduce that ammonia level. But that's the reason why I prefer the fishless cycle, because with that, I'm not harming any fish. I'm not going to have any fish die as a result of that. So once I've cycled my tank without fish, I know I've built the bacteria levels up enough that I can start slowly adding fish, and that I can kind of see their progress, monitor them, how they're doing as well, and then, kind of check as those, that bacteria level adjusts. In most cases, I'm actually putting a little bit more ammonia than necessary just to kind of build that bacteria level up. And then my fish are actually then, ready to enter the aquarium. Everything's been cycled. The fish are doing great. And then over time, as you need to or want to add more fish, you can do that as well too. So with the fishless cycle, the two ways I mentioned is adding fish food. Just buy regular fish flakes, start sprinkling some in there over time, and then it'll eventually decay and build up, but that takes a little longer. The method I prefer is using actual ammonia. So just buy a bottle of ammonia like this, pick it up at your hardware store, and you're just adding, in this case, I've seen some of the formula is like, 1 to 2 parts per million, and then you're basically, looking at your test, kind of judge that. I'll get like a dropper and then just drop, per gallon, maybe 4 or 5 drops per gallon until it builds up. So you don't want to dump it in all at once. You want to do it, over a couple of days, just till you get that buildup. And then, it's reading properly on your tests. And then from there, then you just need to kind of wait. If you got a tank that you're going to have with tropical fish and you're going to heat it, I would say stick your heater in there, turn it on, because the bacteria are going to kick in faster when the tank water is warmer versus if you're just using it at room temperature. They're going to grow a little slower. A good way to kickstart your aquarium is if you have other aquariums in your house. In this case, I've got 2 filters. I've got a bubble filter on one side, and I've got a mechanical filter on this side over here closest to me. And so in that case, you can actually take the filter pad, take either the sponge filter or the filter pad out of this mechanical filter, and squeeze some of the stuff off of that into your new tank. Basically what you're doing is when you're squeezing that filter off in your tank, you're introducing the bacteria in a larger quantity than normally is in there. Like the bacteria, like I said, normally is in there. It takes time for it to build up, but you can really increase the speed of that by just, either even swapping one of the filters out, take the bubble filter over there, swap it out, put a brand new bubble filter in here. I've got redundancy in this tank. There's the mechanical filter and there's a bubble filter. So I'm not worried about taking one filter out, or if I didn't want to take a filter out, let's say I only had the one, just squeeze off some of the material in the filter there. You're going to have a lot of mulm, so to speak, and there's a lot of bacteria in that, and then just put that in your other tank, and that'll help speed up the cycling process. Like I mentioned, I've got a mechanical filter right here. It's a flue-vol internal filter, and then I've got a bubble filter run with a air-lined hose and just basically run with air, so it's a non-mechanical filter. So with those filters, basically the bacteria is going to colonize on the filter pads, on the bubble filter pad itself too, and they're just going to colonize there because they like to be in a spot where the water is moving across them. That's how they, as the ammonia passes by, they'll grab it up, and nitrate passes by and they'll grab it up. So you need some sort of filtration in your tank as part of your cycling process. So as the bacteria colonize your filters, you need to make sure, I do wash them periodically. I don't wash them in tap water per se, because you've got the chlorine there and the chloramine's there. You could always treat your tap water if you want. But what I do is I'll just, as I'm doing water changes, the water I've taken out of the tank, I'll just drop the sponge in there, drop one of either with the air bubble sponge or the sponges from the mechanical filter over here, and just kind of squeeze them out just to get all that excess stuff out of there. You got your algae buildup, your mulm and whatnot too. So that's out of there. Put the filter back in there. Most of the bacteria is good to go, and it's not going to have much issue. In this case, like I do have 2 filters in there, so I alternate. This mechanical filter here, it has two pad filters, one on each side, and then I've got the bubble filter. So if I'm cleaning, I can clean one time. I'm going to clean the bubble filter. I'll take that out, clean it, and just leave it in there. And then the other, maybe a couple weeks later, a month or 2 later, whatever, I'll clean this side. I don't clean my filters as much because I don't feed the fish as much. So I'm not, putting a lot of nitrates into the tank. I've got plants as well that help me take care of my nitrates. And then the feeding as well too, is if you feed your fish a lot, too much, then you're going to get that buildup of nitrates, and you're going to need to do more water changes, and you're going to see, otherwise you will see issues with algae. I've got this tank here. It's painted black on the back, so it does get a little bit sunlight here and there, depending on the time of day. But I really don't have an algae issue. Front of the glass does get algae, and I just scrape that down. And then there's algae on the rocks and whatnot too, but it's not a big deal to me. And then, but the most part, because I don't overfeed my fish, I do my regular water changes. I don't have much issue with algae in this tank, with algae. I don't, because I, limit the amount of food I feed the fish. I mean, they're well fed, but they're not overfed. And then I do my regular water changes. I don't have much issue with algae in this tank. So with the ammonia, if you're going to go buy the ammonia from a local store, your hardware store, your grocery store, whatever, whoever sells this ammonia, you want to make sure the ammonia is pure ammonia. You don't want anything, no what they call surfactants, detergents in there, odors, scents. They scent the stuff. You just want, basically, the ingredients need to say ammonia and water. That's all you want in there. Anything else, then that's going to leave behind, especially if you have detergents there, it's going to leave behind residues in your tank. Even the scents, you don't need any scents in there. That leaves behind residues in the tank, and that, that can become toxic to the fish when they're introduced in there. So basically, just ammonia, just water. I bought this bottle $6-7 from Ace Hardware a couple years ago. It's lasted me. I've got this tank here is the main tank. I've got a tank in the basement, which is right now just holding some plants. It's got some plants and snails in there, no other fish. But I plan on adding some more tanks, building up a fish room in the basement. I'll be using that ammonia. I will basically scrape take some of the bacteria from the existing tanks and then put that into the new tanks just so they cycle much faster. And some other ways of kind of cycling faster is, I mentioned using the filters from these tanks. And with that too, you want to make sure that the filters are coming from healthy tanks. I mean, if this was, if you had a diseased tank, there's some sickness or some illness going on with the fish, then you don't want to use those filters in there. Well, the most part, you're just scraping out the bacteria, but you never know what else is going to get in there. So avoid tanks that are not healthy. There is also a bottled bacteria you can buy. I bought Tetra brand when I was first starting my tank. I was actually starting a quarantine tank in the basement where I would basically introduce the fish first there, leave them there for about 4 weeks before I brought them up to my display tank here. And that's just to, with the quarantine, make sure they're healthy fish when they get transferred into the tank. It's easier and cheaper to treat in a smaller tank versus, this is a 55-gallon tank. That was a 10-gallon quarantine tank. But with that, I did use I kind of got impatient. I wanted to, kickstart the cycle, so I went and bought this bottle of bacteria that basically is supposed to kickstart the cycle. And I bought that off of Amazon. It was Tetra brand. So with the bacteria that you're getting from these bottles, the store, either you get it at local stores, you don't know how they were treated. I mean, were they kept in a cold, refrigerated truck? Were they kept in a hot truck? It got 100 degrees above or whatever. But there's sensitive bacteria in there. Too much heat or too much cold can kill that bacteria and kind of make it worthless. So I mean, even if you're spending $5-6 on a bottle like that, but if it doesn't do anything for you, then that's a waste of money. But I figured, hey, I was kind of getting impatient with cycling my tank. I said, let me try it as an experiment, and it actually did. It did kickstart it. I think I was in week 2 or 3, was not seeing any results, and then I added a bottle of that, and then within a week, I saw the cycle start to take off through my tests. So. Yeah, I would recommend those bottles. They could be useful for, quickly start cycling your tank. They're not very expensive too, but, buy it from a trusted source. If it's been sitting on the shelf, for years, then I question that whether it's going to work well or not, versus if you have something that's, the stock is getting updated frequently, then I'm more likely to say, okay, use that, and, that'll help kickstart your cycle. If you don't have, sources of either a friend or ask your pet store, hey, can you squeeze off a little bit of water from your filter, and so I can kickstart my cycle. That's always a way. So that's all I have for today on the nitrogen cycle for your aquarium. Make sure your aquariums are cycled. That's going to help your fish survive and thrive. It's your tank, and the fish are going to thank you for it. You're going to have less issues with maintenance, and just having an overall healthy tank makes it much more enjoyable versus where you're having to, you're having fish die on you, or you're having fish get sick, and you got to spend money to treat them. With that, let me know, do you have any questions about cycling your tank? How do you cycle your tank? Are you doing it any different than the way I did here? Putting in anything else other than fish food or ammonia? What else are you doing? Have you seen any benefits for doing something or another in terms of cycling the tank? Feel free to add your comments and questions below, and please give this video a like, and please subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.